Because of feeding. Last week we discussed you are what you eat.
Yes,
I know
you
it's an
did.
interesting
That's
conversation,
very interesting.
and I picked a thing or two. I know some people, they eat like me. Sometimes it's just you feel hungry and you just want to have something to eat, just so
Yeah.
you can make it to wherever you're going to. But
Yes.
um, we learned that it is really, really necessary to, apportion your time, what you eat, make sure you eat more veggies, right?
Yeah.
And the percentage of veggies on your plate should be what, 40% or a quarter of it
It should be
should be
a lot.
okay, a lot. Right. So today we're still talking about what to eat, but I know
Exactly.
today we're discussing eating right during childhood.
Childhood.
Eating right during childhood. So I know our mothers are tuned in, our fathers are also tuned in, and even the babies, if they can understand what we are
They
talking
are
about,
tuned in.
they are
They
tuned in
are.
as well. So tell us, why do you think it is necessary for children to be fed right at childhood?
Yeah. So I'm excited we are talking about eating right during childhood. Now, the way your child is fed during the childhood stages has a very important role it plays. It determines the child's health status during the period of childhood as well as during the subsequent years during adolescence and adulthood. So it will surprise you to know that a child's nutritional status during the childhood period could be determining certain disease conditions when the person is
Mm-hmm.
older. Now, we are talking eating right. What exactly is eating right? Many mothers are thinking, I'm giving my child this particular food and I'm sure the child is eating right. But then to eat right means that you are following a certain style of eating which promotes good health and also reduces your risk for diseases. And so if the food you are eating isn't promoting good health and it is not reducing your risk for diseases, then I'm sorry,
You're not
it is
eating
not
right.
eating right.
I had a message from because Mirabelle, my producer, actually spoke with me about this.
Okay.
So, and then I think I put it on my social media. And then I had some conversations. I started some conversations, and there
Yeah.
was one mother who actually has two babies. Okay,
Okay.
an adolescent and of course a 1 year old.
All right.
Now the adolescent is okay, but the woman wants to make sure that he's actually eating right.
Okay.
But the 1 year old is not eating right. She's not feeding him right.
Okay.
What do you think she's supposed to do in this instance? What are some of the barriers in, childhood feeding?
All right. So during childhood feeding, there are numerous barriers. But then, even before we talk about the barriers, okay, growth during childhood is rapid. All right. So as the child comes from infancy through childhood, the growth process is quite rapid, and
Yeah.
so it is necessary that a child meets his or her nutritional requirements during that period. Now we assess growth to be able to determine if a child is meeting his or her nutritional requirements. So it's important, mothers are supposed to be sending their children to the hospital. Go see your physician, the doctors, go see your dietitians, let them assess the child's nutritional status. If the child is below the bar, you know that my child is not eating
Eating
right.
right. Mhm.
If the child is above the bar, you know the child is not eating right as well. So we are expecting children to be within a certain range. When you see your dietitians, they can help you determine that. Now the barriers to eating right, okay, if a mother knows these barriers, it will help her to know whether she is doing the right thing with feeding her children or not. Now one barrier we look at is a physical barrier, where the child may not be able to chew, may not be able to swallow, or the child is not able to determine the difference in consistency of meals. Now I meet parents that come like and they go like, maybe no, when I put rice in the child's mouth, the child is swallowing it. When I put yam in the child's mouth, the child wants to swallow it. Now, children have transitioned from only breast milk or only liquid foods to
Oh, they have? It's not just breast
no,
milk?
I mean that the child is transitioning
Okay.
from
Okay.
breast milk
To-
during the infancy period to solid foods during childhood.
Right.
And so sometimes it's difficult for the child to distinguish the different consistencies you are putting in the child's mouth. So trying to move the child, it should be a gradual process.
Process.
You don't just move from cocoa straight to yam you are confusing the child. So the child may decide to be swallowing that. Now, swallowing solid food, even as old as we are, if you want to swallow something like yam,
it's very difficult. Yes, it
so the child may refuse to even swallow at all.
Right.
Then you can't be complaining. Me manage You see, there's another barrier which is psychological. Sometimes some emotional issues at home can influence a child's intake. Probably a lot of parents may not know this, but then sometimes when there's arguments, fighting at home, it can affect a child's intake. The child may refuse to eat because
Really?
you don't know.
Even the infants?
Even the infants notice when there is
chaos in the house
at home. Then also sometimes, during childhood, when you are giving medications to the children, we want to put it in maybe say banku, we want to hide the tablets in banku and give to the child. They notice the difference in flavors. Okay, the taste buds of children are very sensitive. So if you put paracetamol in banku, the child will notice, this banku is different.
It tastes different.
All the time you are giving the child paracetamol in banku. A time will come, the child will refuse to eat banku.
Okay.
Then there's also the situation where parents may not be able to supply enough food for their children.
Okay.
So the child is underfed.
Okay.
And so undernourished.
Okay, so now you've moved from the
we
psychological...
have moved from psychological issues to financial issues.
So we've touched on physical issues, we've touched on psychological
issues.
And now we are
on financial or socio-economic issues.
Right.
So if the mother or the parent is not able to provide enough food for the child doesn't get enough.
Right.
The child misses out on certain essential nutrients. Also, sometimes there's enough money to provide enough food for the child. There are certain instances where you are feeding your child. The child gives you cues, say
but you still have to push.
We keep pushing the food to the child. That's also one barrier to getting your child to eat right. You may end up overfeeding your child.
And sometimes they throw up, right?
Sometimes
when they are overfed,
they end up throwing up because the food is too much.
It's too much.
And Then there's also the situation where the method of preparing the food can end up causing the child not to eat right. In that, if you have the mother wants to give her children vegetables because she has heard that vegetables are good for the children, yet she wants to cook it. And she may end up overcooking the vegetables. So you are giving your child vegetables, and yet the nutrients that we intend giving, the child is missing out on them because you've destroyed them through the cooking process. And so the cooking method that would be used is very important. Sometimes you need to seek professional help. Some mothers have to go to the hospital, see the health professionals, let them teach you. Cook this food this way, present the food this way to the child. It will promote intake.
Right.
So these are things that inhibit eating right during childhood.
Okay. So I know that some of these things, like you've said, they are practical stuff that you can even hear on radio. Exactly. But also one thing that I am picking from this conversation is that frequently they should be visiting the dietitian to know exactly what to do when it comes to feeding, right?
Exactly, yes.
Okay, that's very good. So, but let's move to the nutritional concerns in childhood feeding.
Yes.
Yeah, what are some of the nutritional concerns that we can address?
Childhood.
Yes.
So of course there are nutritional concerns. So like I mentioned earlier, sometimes the children are overfed.
Right.
So overfeeding your child will result in the child developing overweight or obesity.
Even at the young age?
Yes, of course.
Wow.
There's childhood obesity. So once the child's weight is too much for the height during that age group, the term is childhood obesity.
Okay, so let's make this very clear.
Yes, please.
What age bracket are we looking at for childhood?
So childhood is the period between infancy and adolescence.
Okay.
The age range we are looking at is between 2 years and then 9 years.
Okay, so from 2
years to 9 years, we are looking at a child.
Okay.
Or childhood.
Okay.
Okay.
So please, listeners, please don't get it confused. If you have a 12-year-old on your child,
on your child, according
to
child,
this, but on your child, according to this conversation,
according to this definition,
right,
on your child,
right. So from 2 years to 9 years is what we're talking about.
at.
Please carry on.
All right. So obesity can actually happen during childhood. When parents tend to be so liberal with feeding their children, we want to give our children a lot of sweets, we want to give our children foods that are very high in energy. Yes, we want our health professionals preach that we should feed our children right, but then you should be looking at the particular foods you are giving the child. Are they things that match the energy the child is expending in activity? So if you know that my child is a very reserved type, the child is always seated at one place, not wanting to involve him or herself in playing, the kinds of food choices matters. You shouldn't be giving the child foods that would provide so much energy beyond what the child is expending. You'll be promoting obesity. Then again, there's also the tendency of certain parents, in their fear of making their children obese, they may restrict too much and end up making their children undernourished. So it's important. That's why I keep saying, see the professionals. We are able to determine your child's nutritional requirements. So we tell you, feed your child this quantity, this number of times, you will meet the child's requirements. Then you can prevent obesity or undernutrition. We also have a problem where children tend to miss out on certain nutrients. All right, so the combination of foods we give our children can impact the nutrients that the child would receive. For instance, putting milk that contains a nutrient we call calcium together with certain foods like, say, beans that contains a nutrient we call iron. These two put together cannot easily be absorbed
by the child's body.
Yes, because one inhibits the other from being absorbed. So if you know that when you put these two together, the child will miss out on the nutrient, then you rather space them out. Give the child the beans earlier, let the child eat, then later you give the child maybe milk to drink. In that way, you are preventing certain nutrients deficiencies.
So it's not as if, so the thing is, it could be that, the combination or the members of the combination are all very good. The nutrients are good. But if you put them together and they do not help, then it means that it's going to cause a problem for the child. Exactly.
Then also again with iron, the way you provide the iron, say only beans, it may not be absorbed properly. So you have to add a vitamin C rich food. Like vegetables. So you have your bean stew, you use tomatoes, you use cabbage, you use certain things.
A bit of everything.
Exactly. So the absorption is maximum.
But it has to be compatible with
the other. The nutrients should be compatible. Else nutritional deficiencies will occur. Then there's also a problem we have with dental caries. So the child develops to decay. Usually we call it caca in our side of the world. Caca is painful. So the child may not be able to eat properly when this happens. Now, usually we give our children toffee, mami. Akola ne beda no osuaye the toffee ashe ne num no the ada. You end up causing the child to develop caca. The child won't eat well, you'll be in trouble. Then we also have allergies. Allergies is an issue of concern, but then it's difficult to identify.
I was just about asking that. How are you able to determine the next person's allergies? And besides oyakola, so how do you determine that?
So it's very important that when you are introducing foods to a child, you take your time. You don't rush in showing the child all the foods in the world. You start with maybe rice. You give your rice several times and be sure that the child didn't exhibit any resistance or any intolerance. The child didn't vomit, the child didn't run a diarrhea. Then you are sure this child is not allergic or is not intolerant
to this particular food.
Exactly. So mothers should be patient with their children in introducing new foods. It is then that you identify if your child is allergic or not. Now we've listened to the barriers, we've heard of the concerns. What are the actual things we should be doing with feeding our children?
Which are a form of like guidelines, right? Dietary guidelines.
that you should use in feeding your children.
Okay.
So the first thing I want to talk about is physical activity before we talk about the food itself. Now, parents should study their children's activity levels. If your child is not active, make sure that you are not packing so much calories or energy from food on the child, else you may end up causing your child to become obese. And later the child will come and ask you, Mama, I don't know am I obese? Please. So parents, know your child's activity level. Encourage activity as well. So don't say my child is not active until she's not active. Try and encourage your children to be physically active. We don't say they should go and jog. Let them play.
Yes.
They should ride bicycles rather than playing the bicycle video game.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, that's a very good point, because now there is the PS4, there is the Xbox 360 and what have you, and
the
children exactly, so most of these children are always seated in their sofas playing video games. I visited a family member over the weekend, and when I got there, the child I think he had the earphones in his ears and playing an online game with a friend. So, but when I got, I was like, whom is he speaking with? Because he was speaking the whole time, and when I said, hey, how are you? He didn't even respond. So this is a very, very good point that you're raising. So before you move on, I'd like to remind our listeners that we are having a conversation with Madam Yayra Saku, who is a dietitian, and we're discussing eating right during childhood. We've discussed some nutritional concerns. We also looked at some of the barriers to adequate dietary intake and nutrient absorption during childhood. And now we are discussing dietary guidelines and strategies for children and adolescents. Please continue.
All right. So we're also looking at giving children vegetables and fruits. They are very important. These are packed with nutrients, vitamins and minerals that you may not be getting easily. You are getting them from your fruits and vegetables. So it's encouraged that mothers provide these to their children. However, the developmental stage of the child will determine the consistency in which you are giving those fruits and vegetables to the child. Right. So if the child hasn't developed teeth, you can't be giving the carrots whole as they are.
I mean, how are they going to chew
exactly.
it?
So maybe the mother will say, oh, make you kitten, but then no, still. Please mash it. You can give your child mashed bananas rather than giving the finger of banana to the child. The child will be biting on it. So
can they make it into smoothies?
Yes, you can make your fruits into smoothies. Okay. They are better with children that haven't started developing teeth.
Right. Okay, but before you continue, let me also announce my studio number. It's 0302-216-541. 0302-216-541. You can please call in and ask any questions that you have with regards to eating right during childhood. Madam Yayra.
So we should also be looking at giving our children whole foods, like whole grains. So instead of giving the child say wheat that has been made into flour, why don't you cook the wheat whole and give to the child?
Okay.
Instead of giving the child white bread, why don't you give the child wheat bread? So we are looking at making sure that the child is getting whole foods. Then we should also limit the use of salt, sugars, and then other seasonings in very young children's foods. Now their taste buds are very sensitive, so if those seasonings are too much in the food, you may end up causing the child to either refuse the food, or when you give other things that are not as seasoned as those ones, the child will refuse those foods. So we should try and then limit the use of seasonings in children's
But can they also get addictive to these seasonings, the sugars and the salts?
They can.
Okay.
So they would want to eat foods that are highly seasoned.
Okay.
If the food is not seasoned like
they don't
that,
like it.
Okay. If you're watching that watching that kind of thing.
Right. Okay, I have a call on the line. Hello. Hello,
good evening.
Good evening, madam. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, your name and where you're calling us from?
Okay, my name is Na. And I'm calling from Medina.
Okay, Na from Medina. Let's go. Okay. We have Madam Yayra Saku in the building.
Okay, so Madam Yayra, I want to ask, let's say, sometimes when we are pregnant, we actually desist from eating certain food. Like, let's say, for me, for instance, now I wasn't able to eat chicken, maybe fish and other stuff. So can it be like, let's say maybe the baby doesn't like it, so we don't need to try it?
The baby doesn't like it. Can you explain what you mean by the baby doesn't like it?
So when I wasn't pregnant, let's say I was eating chicken and other stuff. But when I got pregnant, I wasn't able to eat chicken. I was able to, let's say, take in fish.
Yes.
So does it mean the baby doesn't like it? Or it's just a normal symptom?
Yeah, so sometimes pregnancy comes with differences in hormonal status. So there's certain foods that you never ate before, but you begin to crave them. It happens in the same angle where foods that you like, you get pregnant and now you don't even want to see them. It's normal. It's not that the baby doesn't like it.
Okay. So I think she understands it. So would you move on to your next point? I think you talked about the sugars and the salt.
Yes,
what's the next
please.
one in with regards to dietary guidelines and the strategies?
Yes. So we are also looking at making sure that you are serving age-appropriate foods to your children in age-appropriate utensils. So you don't give your 1-year-old child some very big cup without handle. Asanka. How can you give your 1-year-old child asanka to eat in? It's not age-appropriate. So make sure that utensils are those that have handles. The spoons are those that have pictures of certain
something
animals,
colorful,
something colorful to attract the child to eat the food.
Yes.
If you give a white plate to a child, if you are not careful, the child won't eat that food for you.
Flat.
So please, let's be creative in serving our children.
Okay, so number again is 0302-216-541, 0302-216-541. We are waiting for your calls. If you have any questions for Madam Yayra Saku, she's in here to answer all of them. Please move on.
All right, so the ultimate thing in the guidelines we want to use to serve our children is that make sure the foods are balanced. Your
diet.
meals should have carbohydrates in them. They should have proteins. They should have fats. Should have fruits and vegetables that will bring most of the vitamins and minerals. And so please make sure your meals are balanced for your children. Now for adolescents, they need a lot of nutrients. Please don't try and start restricting your adolescents because you think that they will get obese.
Yeah. Everything in moderation, right?
Everything in moderation. See experts to help you determine their nutritional needs so that you can meet them adequately without missing out on anything.
Any of them, okay.
So I'd always be preaching, see experts. Let the dietitians help you determine what your child should be eating.
Right. And any other thing that we need to know with regards to the guidelines and how we feed? You know, the lady that called actually mentioned, feeding herself and then the baby rejecting it. I know it's something that we mentioned last week, but once you have the baby out, do you just, desist from having such foods, or you have to be patient with it and know when exactly to switch?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, when you are feeding your children, you have to take your time. Certain times the child may refuse the food. Now it is believed that the child can refuse the food as much as 15 times.
Wow.
Before accepting it. So you need to be patient in feeding your children. You give the child once, he refused, twice, you keep trying it in different forms. Try and garnish the food, let it be appealing to the child. So the child may not refuse it at a later time. Okay.
So this one says, I think it's some props to you. She said, this is really educative. I've learned so much from everything she said. Kudos to her. Mm-hmm. She explained things well, given good examples, and educated everyone. So is it recommended that we see a dietitian every once in a while, or one visit does it all?
Every once in a while, you should be seeing a dietitian because your needs are always changing depending on your activity level, depending on your age.
Okay. Thank you very, very much, Madam Yayra Saku, who is a dietitian. We've been speaking with her.
It's a pleasure.
On eating right during childhood, and we hope that we're going to have you again in our studio so that you teach us what we need to know about dieting, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very, very much for coming through. All right.